and we'll get going. So how's that? Is that coming across okay? You see this shared desktop?
Map boards? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so this is an additional piece of software. I'll show us how to lay out the boards at the end for cutting. But this, if you do a lot of CNC and layout work, very useful. And they even have a version that's a little bit cheaper, just a little bit less feature rich. So Map Boards and Map Boards Pro. And that just kind of takes all your parts, lays them flat, so you can CNC them a bit easier without having to figure out where they'll have to go.
So you can what?
You can lay them out for the CNC machine, or even just to make a cut list for the table saw.
And what's a CNC machine?
The big computer-controlled router that we have at the space.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we have, I guess technically like 6 or 7 of them, right? If you include the laser and 3D printers and the rest of that. So yeah, this Mapboard software, good for that. So I can close that down and get that out of the way. So your Fusion 360 probably looks something like this.
No, but I think it's, yeah.
Probably maybe that.
Yeah. A bit different, but
hopefully not too different. The same program, right?
Oh yeah. Same program, but like some of the icons across the top are
okay,
different and stuff.
Right. So up here in the top left, we have the data panel, this sort of 9-box square. You can hide and show that by clicking that. And that's kind of the file browser for all of your projects. So we'll just start a new project. I'll call it SSD Zoom Sessions. Maybe we'll have more. And you see it makes a new project. You can double click into that. And then inside of here, it's just like a regular kind of folder structure within that project. So there's nothing in there because we haven't made anything yet. I'm going to clear this banner out of the way so we have a bit more, touch more space. Seth, you mentioned the licensing. So if you already have it installed, you can go to the top right where it says your name, and then on the question mark next to your name. You go to About. On here, you can see what plan you're on. So mine's just a trial. Expiring 30th of June. But you'll be able to select relevant tiers or plans when your trial expires, I think. And you have your extensions and all that up here, but we won't really use those. So I'm going to be mainly talking about this in the context of woodworking, CNC, because that's kind of my kind of area of expertise, instead of 3D printing. But we'll mock something up quick and small for 3D print towards the end as well. So it's always going to have this untitled project, this untitled file. Even if you close it, it'll open up a fresh one for you. So first thing I normally do is come up to the top or press Control or Command S. and just save that to be what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to call it session 1. And it saves in the left.
So does this saves it in the cloud, right?
It saves it in the cloud. If you wanted to have this on your local computer, it probably has it somewhere in like your temp directory or something like that. But I believe you can export, so file export, and then kind of follow the steps there for the relevant file format. So the default is Fusion 360 file type. The next common, I guess, would be step or STP file.
Somewhere I saw something about that there's an option you can choose to work offline. And I assume if you did that, that it would pretty much have to store the stuff on your computer.
Yeah, working offline. I don't know. Yeah, I never do. So I guess there probably is an option. You can cache this project. That's probably it. So you cache this and then view the offline cache. And they'd show available projects that are offline. I think that's about the things are popping up. I think that's about the extent of the offline. Maybe there's more. Todd, do you know anything about offline?
Sorry, trying to come off mute there. I don't.
Okay. Yeah. With that said, if you're already signed into your account, I believe you can just use it offline and it won't update your cloud files. So obviously I won't turn off the internet because our call would get disconnected, but I could turn the internet off, do my work, save it, and it should store it all in the project locally. And then when I connect to the internet, it will update to the cloud. So that's an option as well. Okay, so with most designs, almost exclusively, you're going to either want to start out with a sketch, or if you're just using simple primitives, there's this menu up here. You have in the top left, design, render, animation, manufacture, simulation, drawing. Usually design's what you want. And inside of that, there's kind of sub-menus like solid, surface, sheet metal, tools. Hey, welcome, Jenna. So tools over here are just things like 3D print. So you can convert it to an STL for 3D print, and then you'd use whatever software you use for 3D printing. Sheet metal, if you're working with sheet metal, they added these tools last year, I think, or the year before. So you can literally lay out your sheet metal and it'll calculate the right folding and all the rest of that for sort of cutting out of one big sheet and then folding it into making the structure. Surface is more kind of organic shapes. So if you were doing like a 3D model of like rolling hills or something bumpy, you can use this. Typically though, I don't veer outside of solid. So design and solid. Inside there, there's a create menu, modify, and generally they're the two menus you'll be using. So create is kind of self-explanatory. It will create shapes or features. And modify is going to modify faces or features or edges or whatever else. And generally, if you hover over something, it will have a little pop-out kind of explaining what it does, which is something the software is really good at. And a kind of wordy description of what that does. So let's get down to some making. Typically, I will start with parameters. So because Fusion's a parametric software, you're able to enter values, parameters, lengths, widths, thicknesses, all the rest of it. And in doing so, you can then later on change your design drastically by just altering that one parameter rather than having to go in and scale something and then adjust the thickness and all the rest of it. So under modify, we go to change parameters and you'll get a menu pop up or a screen pop up. And what we're going to do, where it says user parameters, is just kind of hit that plus button and set up the parameters we're going to be using. So for instance, most standard lumber is 3/4 of an inch, 0.75 inches. And you can select your measurement here. Or alternatively, if I had it in millimeters and I typed in 3/4 of an inch, no, for the name, so the thickness for the name, and then typed in 3/4 inch, it will convert that into a decimal, but we're in millimeters, so it needs to be times by 1 inch, and it will convert that to millimeters for you. So if your machine uses millimeters or your table saw fence or whatever, and the same for the other way around, if we were to do inches and I typed in 19 millimeters, it will give you the value in inches. So for us, I was going to do 3/4 of an inch for the thickness. I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I did actually, we're just going to sort of design a simple shelf with 2 brackets, a backer board, and a top. That'll kind of get us into some curves, rectangles, measurements, the rest of it. So we have thickness, and then we're going to think about what other measurements we'd need to know for designing the shelf. So I guess a primary one would be the depth of the shelf front to back. So let's say that's going to be 10 inches. And we'll call that shelf depth, say 10 inches. And it's going to be the front to back of the shelf. I always use a descriptive name, and then if it's not completely clear, add a little comment. Then again, user parameters. We need to know the width of the shelf that we're making, or the length. So we'll say shelf length. And for that, we'll say we're going to make a 3-foot shelf. So type in 3 FT for feet. And you see it converts that again to inches, so 36 inches. So okay, so that's kind of the top portion of the shelf. Then we need the backer board that we're actually going to screw to the wall, which would be the, say, backer height. And let's make that, let's say, 6 inches. So we've got room to fit a drill in there. And then we can actually reference these parameters with other parameters. It's kind of getting a bit meta, but so the brackets that we're going to use, we'll have like a curved bracket like that, and then sort of squared off to make the L shape. So we'll say bracket radius, or let's call it bracket curve, and say that that's a, no, sorry, this is going to be a fixed length. Let's just say bracket length. And this is where we can reference those other parameters and ensure that everything updates like a waterfall later on, rather than changing one thing and then having to go back in and individually change everything. So where we have the shelf depth front to back, we want that bracket to be obviously not wider than that, and we need to take away the thickness of the backer board as well. So to do that, we can have the shelf depth, and you see it kind of pops up there. So we select shelf depth, and we can do math operations here. So shelf depth minus the thickness of the backer board, and also minus the, like a little bit of room on the front, like an extra inch. You can see kind of sequentially does that. If things aren't working out as you planned there, you can do some parentheses. So a combination of thickness plus an inch taken away. But that's all kind of like math, PEMDAS, BODMAS, whichever kind of rules that you follow. Okay. You can see it gives you the value there, so 8¼ inches. Okay, that's pretty good. I think we just need the bracket. Oh, we got the bracket height, so we're good there. So I just kind of click OK on that, and they're kind of stored in the memory. I'm going to hit save so I don't have to enter those again. What I found recently that's pretty helpful is instead of drawing a sketch for each individual piece, which is perfectly fine, you can do that. So I'm just going to race through, not kind of explain what I'm doing. But you could draw like the shelf, the backer board, the curved shelf support, and that's fine. But what I like to do instead is draw it as if you were looking at an X-ray through the object, and that kind of gives us a bit of a advantage when it comes to making the parts with this little kind of reliance on things referencing other sketches. So I'm going to come out of here because we want to do it from the side. So when you create a sketch, you can either reference it off of these 3 planes. So obviously 3-dimensional space. So this would be the ground, the left, right, and then the front, back. I think we're going to go from the left, right, so we can get the profile of that shelf, and we'll get the length of, or the depth of the top shelf, and then the height of the backer. So we will go from the side here. You see it kind of rotates the view around. And you'll notice up here, the menu has changed. So we have sketch in addition to the other ones. And the create menu and the modify menu has changed as well. We have some other ones here like constraints. So there is a couple of caveats with the sketches. So you see if I just draw this rectangle, it's all completely blue, which means none of the lines are locked in place. They can move, they can scale, we can wiggle them around. Now you can drag it by the corner to be different sized, which is obviously no good for if you wanted to actually have something be consistently correct sized. So what we can do is add dimensions to it by hitting D for dimension, or I think S for search, and you can type in the tool that you're looking for. So dimension, sketch dimension. So hitting S is a good way to find a tool that's kind of tucked away in the menu. So if we want to create something and it's a slot, but we want a 3-point arc slot, it's kind of a good way to find that really quick. So it's S and dimension. So we're going to set this top piece. We're going to imagine this is our shelf if we're looking from the side. And we will say that this dimension here is going to be it was our shelf depth. And if you type that in, shelf depth, it will create a little dimension. You see it says fx 10.00, and that fx means it's a parameter or it's referencing something else. So by it doing so, it's not like if we just typed in 10 here and then we wanted to change the depth, we'd have to go individually into this sketch and then change that. Whereas if we do shelf depth, we can change the value from one central location. So then we need to tell it that the height of this shelf from the side is going to be the thickness of the wood. So in this case, we can either click on the side here and drag out. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that, or we can click once here and then once at the top, and you see both those lines are highlighted now. And we can then click to set the dimension and say that it's the thickness and hit enter to lock that in. So you'll notice that it's still all blue. We can move it around, but we can no longer change the shape or the length or the height or whatever. And that's because the dimensions have locked in the size and shape of that. So the one thing we can do, you always have this sort of target kind of thing. This kind of looks like a crash test symbol. That's always in all the sketches, and that's the origin. If it's not, then you can turn the origin on and off like so, up in the top left. But this little sort of gray and white symbol is always there. So what we can do is drag one of the corners of this rectangle we've made. So click and drag and just kind of hover over there. You see it kind of snap into place with a little blue square around it. And that little blue square means that it's going to be locked onto that point. You see all these lines have turned black now, which means, try as we might, if we dragged it and moved it, nothing, nothing, nothing. So we can't edit this now. It's locked in place, which is what we want. Because as soon as things are not locked down, it means that they can shift and move, the angles could change. So I'm just going to save that there so we don't lose the progress we made. I guess now actually is a good time to mention that as you save, your one file gets updated. So if you look on the left, there's a little V3 there, which means we've done 3 saves. If you click on that, it'll drop down, it'll show you the past versions, and you can actually open those up and kind of roll back to previous versions. So if you mess something up too bad, as long as you're saving frequently, it shouldn't be a problem. So we have the top of the shelf, we're going to need the back and then the bracket. So we're going to do the same thing again, but instead of using a rectangle this time, we're going to use a couple of lines just to show something a little different. So I'm going to hit up here in the top left, my big mouse there, or you can press L for line, or again you can search for line by pressing S and typing in line. And we're going to reference it off of this bottom corner here. So I'm just zooming in with my mouse scroll, and wherever your mouse is going to scroll, it's going to zoom around that point. So if I zoom up here, it's going to zoom out from there. So you're always kind of going towards or away from your cursor. So we're going to use the line tool. I'm going to go from this bottom corner, and I'm purposely going to draw it not straight so we can fix that with some of the features. So I'm going to kind of draw it off at an angle like this and say that it is the backer height. and hit enter. You can see this is blue now. We can kind of wiggle it around. It can move, but it's fixed in length. So what we can do to make sure that that is aligned perfectly with the with this back edge of the shelf is up here where you see constraints in the top. You have a bunch of different options, and most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So horizontal vertical is going to lock this to whichever one is closer. In this case, it's vertical. I'm going to undo that. If we were to move this up a little and then do horizontal vertical, it'll lock it to be horizontal. So coincident is just means one of the points, these sort of faint white dots on the end. You can link one of those to another object. So if we were to click on this dot and then click on this bottom edge of the shelf, it'll snap around. You can't really see it because it's kind of hidden there, but it's kind of, it's there, it's lined up. So that's the first two. Tangent is if we want to do something tangent to a curve. So you could do like a circle and have it be tangent to this line. And that'll kind of lock those together. But it can still kind of size up and move freely around. Equals. We can't really do anything with that in this case because we've already set the length, but it would just make the lines of whatever you're selecting the same size. So if we use circles again, if we're using equals on these, it will make them the same size. And if we scale one up, it scales the other one up too. Press some Command Z to get rid of those. Parallel is going to kind of do what it says. If we click here and then another line, it will make them parallel. Perpendicular, which is going to be the one we'll end up using. I'm going to click this line and then this line. Oh wait, no, that would be parallel. If we use a perpendicular on this line we just created in the bottom here, it will make them perpendicular 90 degrees, which is what we want. This padlock just locks it in place wherever it is. The midpoint is, it uses it finds the middle of a line. So if we use midpoint here, we can lock this point to the middle of this line. And you see a little triangle appears above it. If you ever want to get rid of a constraint, you can just kind of click on that little symbol, highlight it, press delete, and then you kind of separate it. So concentric just is going to make circles concentric. So they're going to have the same center point. Curlinear means something's going to share the same line. We could use that one as well, actually. We can use that on this line and this line. It's going to make sure they're perfectly lined up. Symmetry means, obviously, that you're going to be mirroring about a center line. So if I make a mirror line here, and then do a circle here, and a circle over here. I can do a symmetry. I select the circle on the right, the circle on the left, and then the line in the middle, and it makes them symmetric about that line. Just make sure I've undone everything. Curvature, I very rarely use. It may well have good use, but it kind of gives you the blurb there. I can't really speak about it because I don't use it enough. And I think that is all of them. So we're going to save, and we're going to use, I think, Collinear to make this line up. So click our line there, and then back to that. And press escape to get out of that tool. So with that line done, we can either do the same process again, or let Fusion do the work. And kind of, if you get close to 90 degrees, you see it kind of snap, and it has the little right angle symbol there, so you can be sure. And we'll say that we want this to be going out as far as the thickness of our wood. So thickness, and now it can only be that size. It's got a little padlock. I'm pointing on the screen like you can see it. It's got a little padlock next to the word box, a little golden padlock. So we'll just kind of get it close to 90, let it snap, and then click. And then you can see, because we're drawing lines, it already kind of starts our next line for us because we haven't closed it off. So we can either press escape, hit this little create and continue, or we can use that feature and drag it and kind of meet the top line here. So you can see again that little symbol pops up near the intersection as a right angle. And even though we didn't draw a line along the top, you can kind of see that it does fill it in and make it a whole shape. So if I double click on that, you can see it's only actually 3 lines, but because it's sealed against this underside of the shelf profile that we made, it does in fact complete the shape. So I'm going to save that. And finally, we're going to do the curve for the support. So of course you could do like a triangle shape if you wanted. That's fine. We're going to do better than that though. So we're going to get a 3-point arc. So create arc, 3-point arc, or alternatively, oh, it looks like Tucker does actually want to make it. Yeah, so 3-point arc, and we will kind of click on the bottom of the shelf. You can kind of see it has an X there saying it is going to start the arc there. And just kind of click somewhere on the backer there. And you'll be left with this kind of like flexible line. And you can kind of drag out to whereabouts looks good. Roughly there. You can see though this has kind of got an undercut shape to it. It's kind of going in at an upwards angle into the backer board, which is not ideal. So what we can do there.
What if we want to start and end, like those points that you put on those 2 boards? What if we wanted those to be in a specific spot? Would that be a parameter?
Which part, sorry?
Measure that?
The start.
Line is connecting with the straight lines. If we needed it a specific measurement from like the origin point, for example.
Yeah, so I just be easy enough for me to kind of make that. So if I just kind of get this out of the way. So you just kind of draw it off at the end here. So let's just say it's down there. It's going to be the backer height. And then as we were, thickness, and then back up to the top. And you can see it's blue. So it can only move along here side to side. So yeah, you just do a dimension and either click the line and then the point there, or the back of the shelf kind of see it highlighting blue. And from there, you can just kind of say whatever, like 3 inches. Is that?
No, the way that you had it before, where the 2 blocks of wood are at a right angle, you were adding on that curved piece. What if I wanted that curved piece to be at 8 inches along the top?
Okay. Yeah, so
An arbitrary spot.
yeah, you kind of do it the same way. So you just kind of click somewhere arbitrary as long as it's on the edge, and the same on the second one, and then get the rough shape. And then D for dimension or S, search for dimension, and do it that way. And then you can kind of click the point where the arc starts, and then say the origin, and then say that's 8.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, pretty much similar kind of deal.
Are you able to adjust the shape of the curve of the line now, or is that fixed in place?
Yeah, so if we, so I've just removed that dimension, but you can see if I just drag this single point, it changes the shape.
Right.
If I drag the entire curve, it kind of just changes the radius, but keeps the shape the same.
Okay.
So what we'll do there is we're going to check the parameters actually, because I think we actually need, I know we got a bracket depth, a bracket length, sorry. So we use the dimension here from the top of the arc to the backer board, and we'll say that that is our bracket length. You can see kind of, it leaves us with that 1 inch dimension here on the front. And you can see that's locked in place. So it's giving us this dialog here that says adding this dimension will over constrain the sketch. Choose OK, and it'll show you the dimension, but that dimension will not impact anything. It'll just kind of be for reference, and it's highlighted in parentheses just to kind of show you the distance, not that it's driving anything. So we still have this kind of loosey-goosey thing. So our shape is not kind of in place. So what I was saying before, this kind of shape to me doesn't seem like it's going to be supporting much of the weight properly. Kind of want it to be coming out flat or curving upwards. I'm sure it'll be fine, but aesthetically as well, it's a bit better. So we can actually do something with construction lines, which are lines that do not directly influence the sketch profile you're creating, but they kind of help you with constructing other lines, other geometry. So we'll get our line tool again, and over here on the right-hand side, where it says sketch palette, we can either click on construction or just press the X key and have that become a construction line. You'll see it makes a dotted line rather than a solid line. So what we're going to use that for is we're going to make a line coming off of the backer board here, and we're just going to draw directly out perpendicular using the snap feature to make sure it's 90 degrees to that back edge. And this can be however long we want, because it's just for for construction line purposes. Click the little green tick, and you can see if I press escape, it has the perpendicular constraint there. And what we're actually going to do is,
How did you open the sketch palette again?
it's either going to be on the right hand side by default when we're inside a sketch, or it may be minimized, like a little tiny kind of hidden away bar. But it's always going to be on there in some capacity, either as like a little minimized thing like that, or stuck to the edge and minimized against the edge. And it's just got arrows there that kind of let you drop that out. I recommend you kind of learn the shortcuts, like almost any software really. And it makes it a lot quicker for switching between. So X for construction lines on, X for construction lines off. And I just like to think of that as kind of Xing out the line. Like you can still see it on the sketch, but you would not use that for reference. So now we have this coming out of our backboard, we can actually use the tangent constraint that we mentioned before. And by using the tangent constraint, we can have the curve here come out at a tangent from this construction line. You can see that it just grazes it, but it's still tugging upwards.
So it just moved it. Did you need to select the line first and then the curve to make the curve move?
If I undo, selection order can and does matter sometimes. So if I select the construction line and then the curve, it'll move the construction line to the curve. If I do the other way around, I believe it should. Well, it's going to do the same thing. Okay.
Interesting. Is that because that's a construction line then maybe?
It might be.
Okay.
But it's also because it's not locked in place. So it's just kind of doing a coin toss, I guess, whether it moves. I guess it's probably not a coin toss. It's probably something along the lines of it's less computationally intense to move the straight line than to calculate the curvature again.
Sure, but that would also, that doesn't necessarily give me what I want if I want the line to be the guide. I'm sure there's some setting, because I know there's, with like Inkscape as you're drawing stuff, you have a way to choose, is it the first thing that, everything else changes to, or is it the center of the selection? Is it, so I'm wondering if there's a setting that would give us that.
Typically, if I just draw like two lines, say, it will be the one that you select first is going to be the one that joins to the other line. So if I select this point and click it over to here, maybe I'm just a complete liar, I don't know.
Okay, we don't have to get bogged down in it. I was just curious.
So it used to be the one that you select first moves to the second one, but it appears to be the other way around now. So if I select this one first, the second line is going to connect to, if I select the other one first, the longer line connects to it. Cool. So yeah, so we can still move this construction line, still move the arc, even make it an infinite arc, I guess. But what we're going to do is use the coincident to lock the end of this sketch arc onto this construction line. And that will mean that it's coming out exactly kind of perpendicular and curving upwards. So we select the little point at the end of the arc and then the construction line. That's kind of what we're after. And we can still move these around. You can see this one's blue, this one's orange, so neither of them are locked in place. But that curvature is always going to kind of come out flat and then go upwards then. Even if we bring it all the way down here, it's going to stretch out the top in order to counteract keeping this flat. So maybe you just want kind of sleek design like that, or a little bit further down. That's kind of whatever kind of thing you're feeling. So for us, I think we'll just set a dimension here from the construction line to the bottom of the backer board and say that that's always going to be 1 inch. So you can see there that locks that into place. It's a black line now. I'm going to hit save. And in the top right, you can see it says finish sketch. And clicking that's important to get your kind of 3D menus back. So you can either click finish sketch in the top right, or on the sketch palette, there's also a little finish sketch button there as well. And you can see the kind of, when you click that, it pulls you back out into this 3D view. Oh, excuse me. And you can navigate either by dragging the cube in the top right, or in the bottom, there's an orbit tool, and you kind of click and then drag around to see different angles. Press escape to get out of that. Or you can look directly at something by clicking the look at, and then that face. But in general, I kind of work from the home view, which is on the view cube in the top right. You just click the little house. It gives you that kind of like nice 3/4 view. So I will be using this. It's kind of a good view to see what we're working with. Again, Todd, just kind of covering the orbit and movement of the camera. So yeah, home view, and we will save. I maybe save too often, but to me it doesn't really. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. No, it's never too often. Recently, actually, there's a feature added where you can create a milestone, and you can just type in what that milestone was. So for us, it was finished the sketches portion.
So can you go over to the versions? I'd love to see, is there a way to delete versions in between? So like you can clean up, in that list of versions, you can clean up ones that you really don't care about.
Yeah, so on the version list, you can show all versions and say, we didn't do much between version 1 and 2. So let's just get rid of version, actually no. Short answer, no.
Well, hold on, click on something other than version 1, because, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, you can see because we created a milestone, it puts a little flag there. And that just kind of helps you quickly see which ones are milestones and which ones are just regular saves. And it'll give a little title up at the top, so finish the sketches portion.
However, it is actually pretty cool how you can set a milestone afterwards. So like if you go to number 5, you can set that as a milestone. So, saving often is going to pollute this with a lot of saves, but you can at least go back in and say, nope, that one was a good milestone that we can go back to if we need to. Right.
Exactly. That's probably the best use of it. So now that we have the sketch profile done, we can actually start making this 3D into an object that we could actually use and maybe better visualize what it is that we're creating. So far, all we've done is make a 2D drawing inside a 3D space. And you can see that in the bottom in what they call the design history. So there's a little symbol in the bottom. It says sketch 1, and then a little timeline slider. So if I move the timeline back, oh no, everything's gone. But don't worry, because you can just move the timeline forward again. And it's back. And yeah, this design history timeline is going to be very useful for when you have things that are referencing other features. Just want to check to see if Tucker's here. So I think Tucker's just joined us. For your benefit, Tucker, we're recording this session just so we can put it up on SSD's YouTube and cut it down and do the rest of it. If that's okay with you.
I don't think he heard you. His
Okay.
thing connecting to audio still.
Okay. Yeah, Tucker, I'm just recording this session so that we can put it up afterwards on the YouTube.
Cool. I can hear you now.
Cool. So far, we've kind of made a sketch. That's about it. It's kind of an important part, but it's basically in the top left. You have sketch. You can choose a plane to put it on. We chose the side plane, so we can make a shelving unit. It's very simple.
Don't worry about me. Just continue where you are. I realize I'm joining really late, so just keep them going.
Yeah. So you have different shapes at the top, and then you can kind of connect them together using the constraints in the next sort of menu set.
Jacob, could you say a little bit more about that kind of an error warning message? Because I've been seeing that as I first start to use this about over-constrained and what you do with that and what it means.
Okay. So I'm going to double click on the bottom here where it says sketch 1. And that's going to take us back into our sketch. You can see all these dimensions. I will delete that one there. So we'll say this point to this point is that, and we cannot choose what that dimension is because we've kind of gone from trying to figure out which kind of direction is correct here. We've gone from screen right and then towards the left. So the last part that we're trying to dimension here is basically telling us that you can't choose that dimension because you've already used up all the parts that would make that dimension possible. I don't know if I'm explaining that well. Basically, we have 10 minus 0.75 minus 8.25 leaves us with 1, and we can't change that 1. So it kind of just passes.
It generally also means that you've got constraints that are conflicting. So you're trying to do something in the constraint. You've already set like a rule up. That's what the constraints are, to do something.
Yeah.
Like keep it, perpendicular, and you're trying to flex it one way or another. And it's saying, hey, you really asked me to set this, equal or perpendicular to something. And what do you want me to do here?
Right. So for example, this construction line, we can move it back and forth. It's locked in the angle that it's at, but we can still kind of change the length of it. So if we were to set the dimension of this line to be whatever it is, 11.1, we then cannot go into the constraints and say that actually this line equals the same as the top, because it will give us an error.
That little error that popped up, that's what I've seen a bunch.
So it's just telling you there's something else that's blocking that. If you click on more info and kind of drag it out, it will kind of give you the least helpful message and just say, try revising dimensions or constraints. So it's you just kind of have to work backwards, I guess, and think what.
But yeah, know that you've asked it to do something that conflicts with what you've asked it to do before.
Yeah.
I got it.
Cool. So yeah, we're in our 3D view here. We can use the cube to rotate around the home view to get it into like a nice 3/4 angle. And what we're going to do from this is, because we're just doing a kind of flat profile, we can use the extrude. So E for extrude, or as per usual, S, and then search for extrude. And you're going to want the blue version because we're working with solid models. And you can see this menu pop up, usually on the right-hand side. And it'll ask you to select a profile. And what we're going to do in this case is select the profile for the top of the shelf. So we just kind of click on that. You see it turns completely blue, saying that's what's highlighted. If we wanted to, we could select all three. And you can just click on something again to unselect it or deselect it. But we're just going to be doing the top for now. And all these settings here are going to go through. So we're saying that the extrusion, if I were to drag this out, just dragging out with a little arrow, we can actually angle it as well. We want it to be kind of tapered out, thicker, thinner, whatever. We just want it to be flat, so 0 degrees. So what we're going to do there is say that we want it to start where we've started our sketch. So that's the profile plane. We can also offset it by a fixed amount. So offset by 2 inches from the plane, and it will start the extrusion offset from the edge. And we'll actually use that feature to make sure the brackets are not right on the edge of our boards. And then additionally, we can say it's starting from an object. We don't have any objects in our scene aside from the sketch, so it's kind of redundant to use that at this point. So we're just going to use profile plane, and it's going to be a direction of one side. You can do two-sided, where you can put in different values. Symmetric, where you can either do the whole length, and it will kind of extrude both at that whole length, or it's kind of far. A measurement, where it will go from just basically half of that length. And that's the distance that you type in here. But again, what we're going to do is one side, and we're going to do a distance of the length of the shelf in the parameters. So we can just type in shelf, it'll kind of show us what options are there. And shelf length is what we want. So I'm going to scroll out, zoom out a little. And taper angle is going to be 0, because we want it to be flat. And what we actually want to do here is under operation, we're going to want to choose new component. And that's just going to mean if we wanted to have many of this object, then it's always going to be the same by using a component. If we were to use new body, it's kind of saying, yes, it's a solid body, but it's an individual one. It's not one of many. I don't know if that's making sense. There's also other options here: join, cut, intersect.
So when you say new body, does that, it changes the definition basically of what you're doing here? It means that would be a separate, like, actual design almost than a component of a design. Is that correct?
So a body is basically the lowest level 3D item you can have. So it's saying it's, yes, it's a 3D item. This is the solid model, but that body is just that individual piece. A component can have multiple bodies inside it.
Okay.
So if you were to be doing...
So I had it backward.
Yes, I think so. And of course, you can have multiple components within a file, within a project.
Right, but I was thinking that the body, the way you were mentioning it, I was thinking it was opposite. I thought the body was like a composite of components, right. But it's the other way around.
Getting dry mouth.
Jacob, in this extrude step, it seems like you were changing or could change some of those distances, for want of a better term, that you set up in the parameter section. Did I misunderstand that? I mean,
slightly. So I can drag this out to be whatever, and it'll put in a hard value. See here, it says 16.081.
Right.
However, we don't want to do that. We want to use the parameters that we set up. because doing so means that we're able to change it later on a lot easier than if we were to use a fixed value here. So,
right. So, but you could. That's what I was seeing. That you
yeah, absolutely. If you're just
could have
doing,
overridden it. You know, because you said, okay, I don't want the shelf 3 feet long. I want it 2 feet.
right, but in using the parameter, we can change that in one central location, and you'll see how that's beneficial towards
Oh
the,
yeah, no, I just was wondering if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing.
yeah, you can type anything here. You could type in 200 feet. I mean, good luck finding the board that's that long, but
Or the place to put it.
yeah, right. But you can type in a hard number there. So for us, we're just going to type shelf length, which is the parameter we set up at the start. From the profile plane, one-sided extrusion, it's going to be to the extent of the distance we tell it. If we had more objects in the scene, we can make it go to one of those objects or forever, apparently. That's more so when you're using a cut operation to say you want to cut out something in this shape. But typically it's distance or to object that we want to use. Shelf length, taper angle 0. Operation is, so it says new body here because I created that component when I used the 200-foot example. So we're going to select new body here, and you can see here inside of the component 1 that it made, there's the body on the left. Is that good? So what I then like to do is, if you kind of highlight the component in the menu on the left, you can highlight it and then click it once, and you can rename it. So we'll call this one shelf top, and hit enter. And I'm just going to move the camera around, click and drag down here, so you can get a view underneath, so we can see our other profiles. So we're going to do a similar thing again for the back, and essentially it's going to be the same process. E for extrude. We'll select that backer board, and a couple ways you can do it. We can do 30 inches. We could say it's the same as the shelf length, not depth. And I'll match up there. But you can see, if you kind of look in this corner, it's like a solid object, right? Which is not really how it would be constructed, or if that's even possible. You'd have to have a beam and then cut out this whole excess to make that solid object. So you can see here, it's because it's defaulted in the operation to join instead of making a new component or a new body. And I'm kind of hesitant to go ahead without Todd there, because this might be useful. But
Jacob, since you've already specified in the sketch stage the length and so on, why doesn't, when you go to extrude it default to that?
so,
I'm confused, you know.
or just because we can choose to, you know, extrude this by whatever amount we want. So Fusion's like one of those smart, dumb softwares. It's smart about the things that we tell it, but it's dumb about things that kind of have multiple options. So, for instance, this could just be, you know, we could have the backer boards just be 2 single, you know, 3-inch boards on either side. So in that case, we would just do like 3 inches there. Whereas in our case, it's just going to be a full length runner. So we use shelf length. Does that answer, or am I?
Well, it would seem like if you wanted 3-inch, like what you briefly changed it to 3 inches, you would have done that in the sketch. No?
Well, that's the thing. So our sketch is just from the profile, from the side, like this.
Okay.
So if you were to look down the edge of a shelf with one eye, kind of taking out any binocular vision, it'd be very difficult to say how long that shelf is, right? Like if I hold up my cell phone like this, you can't really tell if that's, you know, like a 10-foot long something, or if it's like a 5-inch long phone. So right now, Fusion only knows about the definite dimensions of the side, right? So you could hold up a ruler to the edge of this, and for sure say that that's, you know, 3 inches, and, you know, it's 3/4 of an inch tall. But that's all you could kind of glean from that angle of view.
Okay. So you're saying that there's a dimension that was not specified in the sketch phase.
Yeah, so the sketch doesn't really know how deep that is.
And I guess I have trouble visualizing the third dimension or whatever. Yeah.
So where was I? Oh yeah, so this is joined up as a single object, but we don't want to do that. We want it to be not joined. We want it to be a new component. You can see it kind of separates that out as two different objects, right? As if it was two boards meeting up together. So it's going to be the same length, shelf length.
So 1 second there. That's where if you had left it as one body or as just new body, would it glom it together with the other as a component?
No, so we could do a new body for this as well, and it'd be fine. But just by default, because it's touching and not intersecting that other object, it's going to want to join them.
Oh, that's what I didn't see. Okay.
So
but that's how you would join it if you wanted to.
Yeah. So the operation it's wanting to do is join, but we want it to be a new component of its own. Because, you know, this is kind of a lot of effort to go through for one shelf. If you wanted to make 15 of these, it becomes a lot easier to then, you know, duplicate these components 15 times and lay them out on a plywood or whatever. So click OK there. Oh, sorry, real quick. I'm going to double click at the bottom on that last extrude we did and just give an example here where it says extent. So instead of distance, we can actually do to object and select the face on the end here, and it will have it go to that face.
Now, will that also keep that extrusion the same length if we change the one that we said?
Yes. So
okay, because in the measurement it says 2 there, right?
Yeah. If I hit OK, and then I go to the first extrusion we did, and this is kind of part of the beauty of this timeline history at the bottom. If I double click on that extrusion and then say actually shelf length divided by 2, I only want it to be half as long. Click OK. You can see the bottom one updates as well, even though it took place after the first one.
Brilliant.
So that's kind of part of the whole kind of deal of referencing existing geometry and then making sure that geometry is locked in place in the sketch with all black lines rather than blue and orange and whatever else. And B, making sure you have parameters down that you can change after the fact. So I'm going to double click on that again and then change this back to shelf length.
It's kind of like the saying, if you don't have to measure, then don't.
Exactly right. So when you're making a cabinet, I often will measure what I consider the important dimensions. Say if I wanted to make a cabinet to fit in a doorway, like an open pantry doorway kind of thing, I would measure the width of the pantry and then the height. But I would only, say, cut the top to measurement, and then the
So I have a good example of this, Jacob.
yeah,
if you need it.
please. I'm butchering it.
Oh, that's okay. I've done this quite a bit as well. A weekend ago, I was doing aluminum extrusion, and so what I would do. Sorry, I turned off my video because I'm eating, and I don't want you guys, seeing me eat on this. But what you end up doing is I would measure out one piece of aluminum extrusion. I had like 10 of these pieces to cut at this length. And so you fix that one, and I do this with all the different boards that I cut with the miter saw. If I have multiples to cut at the same length, what you do is you measure out one, you cut it, and then you clamp it to where you cut it. So you'd actually clamp it, then cut it. And then every other board just slides on top of that, and you make sure that the end is correct, clamp it down, and then cut. And so now every board is cut in reference to that one.
Yeah.
In the same way here, by referencing the end face, you're referencing where everything else should come to.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example. And yeah, I guess the one caveat is with the CAD software, if instead of doing to the object, we did distance, and then we typed in shelf length as well. Because it's a computer, it's always going to get it right. But yeah, it has the same effect in this case as if we did just do two. And in general, that's probably a better practice, just to use extruding to a face. Because there could be little factors, like if you started it offset by a couple of inches, it's not going to be the same shelf length, it's actually going to be to the edge of that object. So I'm gonna rename the component that I created and call that backer. You see there's a little number after each of these, like shelf top 1, backer 1. And that's just because if we were to do, Control CV on these, it will make a second one, backer 2. Just gonna cancel that and undo. So we will use Extrude again and select the profile for the shelf bracket. Yeah, and we'll say that's going to be extruded by thickness, because it's just going to be one thickness of width. And again, it tries to join them together. One of the things as well, if you remember, we said, if I look at it from the front, we don't want it to be right at the edge, because for a few reasons, it's not going to be as strong. You could split the end grain of the wood as you fasten it together, all the rest of it. So we're actually going to, I can come back into our 3D view and move this extrude menu out of the way. We're actually going to, instead of starting here, we're going to say it's going to be from an object, and we'll use the left edge of the shelf. And honestly, one of my favorite things about Fusion is if I was to hover over here to select the object that we're extruding from, I can't click that left side, but if I click and hold, make sure doing from object. If I was to click and hold, why will it not let me do this? My software is showing me up.
Interface change.
Right. I'm going to start that again. Just E for extrude, the profile that we want, and then from object. There we go. So it's not really easy to tell what I'm selecting, but if I hold down click, in this case, you can kind of see that it's selecting that back edge. So hold down, and then I can select face. And we can offset it from that face by like 2 inches, right? So there, the offset by 2 inches. It's going to be in one direction by a distance of whatever thickness our wood is going to be. You can see there, oh no, it's going the wrong way, because the normal of that face, so the direction that surface is kind of facing is outwards. So we actually need to do a negative offset in this case, inwards like that. And, sorry, making myself dizzy. You can see it kind of offsets it inwards by 2 inches from that face. And then again, it's trying to join all the faces together because it thinks that's what we want to do. We do not. So it's going to be a new component again. And we'll say, okay. And we'll rename those appropriately. So bracket, backer, shelf top. And at this point, this kind of sketch line is just getting in the way, right? So we can open up our little drop-down menu on the left and say to hide that using the little eyeball. So it's no longer visible. So we have one bracket. The quickest way to get another would be either to copy paste and then drag it off to the right, which is fine. But if we were to change the length, say, if we come up here to parameters, click on that, and then we change the shelf length from 3 feet to 24 inches, this bracket is left floating out in the open. So what we can do instead of doing a copy paste, delete that copy paste, we can actually use some construction lines to aid us. So in the top, there's a little menu for construction. And what I like to do is just use mid-plane, which is going to create kind of a virtual plane in the middle of 2 edges that we select, 2 faces that we select. So construct mid-plane on this edge of the shelf, and then click through, holding down to get that left edge. And you can see it gives us a preview of where that middle is going to be. So hit OK there. And this is going to remain the same, even if we were to change the length of the shelf to 2 feet. See, it's still in the middle. So 3 feet stays in the middle. What we can then do is select the bracket component and then create menu. And then we're going to choose mirror. And up here, make sure you have component selected or whatever other option you're working with. If you're just working with bodies, if it was a simple setup, you could use that. Features, etc. And features actually reference the timeline at the bottom. So you can actually do features there, select the feature that you want to mirror. In this case, it would be the extrude option there. And the mirror plane would be this. But we're just going to mirror the component straight across. So the component will be this one. The mirror plane will be the plane we just created. We'll hit OK. And now you can see this is slightly different named. So anything we do to the inside edge of the left one will happen to the inside edge of the right one. So if we were to, I'm just going to fill out this radius here, say OK. Maybe I'm telling lies. I think I am. We would actually have to go backwards in the timeline, sorry, before this. So we'd have to go before the mirror operation in the timeline and then make any edits that we wanted to do. And then come back forwards. And you can see it does on the right as well. So you can actually hop around in the timeline and move the order of things if you click and drag them. So dragging it after the mirror in the bottom makes it only happen to one. Dragging it before the mirror means it happens to both.
That's curious. That's an interesting way to manage.
Yeah. And there's only certain things you can do as well. So I cannot drag this operation that we did back past the creation of this object, obviously, because it will not allow, you can't fill an edge or round over an edge that doesn't exist. And the same with this mirror. I cannot take it back further than this shelf creation, because we referenced two sides of the shelf to create that mirror. So I'm going to remove that fillet because there's no real need for it. So that's kind of where the parameters come into play. So I'm going to hide this construction line as well, and the construction plane, hide that. And just because we had these 5 parameters at the start, say if we had 1/2 inch lumber instead, we could change the thickness of our lumber to 1/2. Everything updates accordingly. 1/4 inch, maybe just in like some nice little, I don't know what you could put on a 1/4 inch thick shelf. If you were to have, let's just set that back to 3/4. If the shelf you're going to use was going to be 2 feet deep, maybe it's inside of a pantry or something, you can do 24 inches. See, it's much deeper now, and it updates this curve accordingly. So I really want to kind of stress the importance of setting up these parameters and referencing them throughout so that you can make these kind of very simple changes in one place. You say, actually, my pantry is not 24 inches deep, it's a shallow one, it's only 12 inches deep. So you can have one design that's very flexible. And the same with the length, again, we can change that to be like a 8-foot shelf. And it keeps that mirrored about the center. So it's 2 inches from this side, 2 inches from that side. There's more complicated stuff you can get into with parameters as well, but it's kind of way over the kind of reasonable expectation of this. Just real quick though, you can do all kinds of stuff. So you can have no units and then say that it's actually a combination of say bracket count, and then it's going to have no units because it's just counting it. And you can say it's the ceiling, so round up of our shelf length, the shelf length divided by the spacings, let's say every 6 inches or less. Enter. And then you see it gives us a value of 16, so it needs 16 brackets to have a bracket every 6 inches or less. I know I kind of blasted over that, but that's kind of just a nifty little feature. And then you can actually use that to the benefit by creating a pattern using that number. So I'm going to hide bracket. I'm going to hide the mirror and just kind of show real quick that you can create a pattern on the path. We're going to use the path of the top edge and say that the distance is shelf length divided by 16. And the quantity that we want is the bracket count. And make sure the spacing is shelf length divided by 16. Oh, sorry, divided by bracket count. And I messed up there. That's my bad.
It joined them all.
I had backer selected, yeah.
Well, it joined them, so, right?
It didn't join them, so this is just a pattern. So it just duplicates the same object over and over again. It's kind of
okay.
a little outside of the space of this, but real quick, I want to show that you can
No, but it's good to see the possibilities, because it then gets us thinking about what to go learn.
Yeah, so the start point is going to be kind of where it is. The distance is going to be shelf length divided by bracket count. And then the count is going to be bracket count. And you can see it lays them out like so. And there might be a little bit of tweaking in there, like this might not be the correct 2 inches, probably isn't. It's like 3 inches. But you know, it kind of gets you pretty close. You can mess with the numbers and find the exact value. So for instance, this value is rounded up to 16. It's probably closer to like 15.9 or something, which we could actually check if we remove the seal function. And I guess actually it's exactly 16. So cool. It's probably a combination of the thickness not being counted, something like that. So if we remove a thickness as well, we'd get the value. But again, like I said, I'm not going to quite go into that. That's more of a math thing than a fusion thing.
But it's cool to see that it's possible to, you know, lay something out, and then if I want to stretch it, you know, if they're supporting pieces of the pattern, that just gets filled in.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. It's a great.
And knowing that you can do this kind of math expression stuff in the parameters is really cool to be able to go, okay, well, I know it's possible. I know there's things, you know, things that allow me to do this. Now I just need to go learn how to do it.
Right. I'm not doing something right here, but anyway, it's, yeah, like you say, it's good to have. I think the only issue here is something to do with the spacing, like I was saying, from this point to here. It needs to be reduced by 1.25. So, I think I mentioned at the start, map boards. It's, you know, it's one of the plugins I'd recommend. Same with this Dogbone plugin or extension, very handy. I hardly recommend both of those. But we're going to use map boards now, just to kind of lay it out. And it says steel because that's the default material. I wouldn't worry about it. It doesn't really affect anything. We're going to say that we have a sheet of plywood, say, so 96 by 48 by 97, 49 by 97. And just go into the options, kind of check through those. We'll say Z up. So this little Z on the cube is our upright position. And there's a couple of options, like match them vertically, so for like table saws, horizontally for ripping, and I usually use diagonally because I use the CNC a lot, especially if you're using plywood anyway, may as well kind of use that. Now you can click OK, and it'll kind of do its computer goodness and lay everything out for us on a sheet of plywood. So if I then hide our original parts.
Sorry, can you go back and do that one more time?
Yeah.
Also, what was the purpose of the diagonally in the sense of it's to make sure you use the least amount of board possible?
Yeah, I mean, so I always say with this software, you can kind of, you can tweak it and get slightly better positioning, sure. But it's whether you want to spend that 20, 25 minutes doing that or if your time is worth more than, the quarter sheet of plywood that you get. But yeah, you see diagonally, it's laid out along boards along the full length.
Depends on how many quarter sheets of plywood I can get.
Right.
Sometimes if it's super expensive material.
Yeah. Yeah, so for instance, I could grab this one and rotate it around using the move and the rest of it and kind of nest those curves into each other a bit better, but I'm gonna...
So that's what that map board feature is?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Sorry, I had to step out for a second. I'll agree with Jenna. How did you end up doing that? Was that the map boards that?
Yeah, so it's map boards. It kind of just does that. You set the size of your material that you're using. In my case, it would be 49 by 97 standard sheet of plywood. And then options, you can say that, yes, you can rotate the components to fit a bit better. And then the options here to match the widths horizontally, the lengths vertically, which in my mind is the same thing, but, or fill boards diagonally for a laser or CNC. Then you can actually do save cut list, and it'll create a CSV file for you. So you can, if you're doing that on the table saw, or you want to make sure all of your parts came off the CNC, you can kind of tick them off as you go. So you can kind of print out a list of them, or have it on your phone or computer or whatever, little CSV file. And then these options are kind of semi-superfluous, like ignore the thickness. If you're just going to be using the same thickness of whatever throughout, in our case we did. But if you, for example, accidentally put 1/2 inch for the bracket depth instead of thickness, but it's all going to be at the same material, you can just say ignore thickness. And the unit type, we're using inches. You could set it to be whatever, but we're going to use inches. Then the trim on board edge, it's leaving as a 1/2 inch. If we want to leave more, we could, or less, we could. That's handy because then if your screws on the CNC, for example, are within or not exceeding 1/2 inch from the edge, that they're not going to get clipped. Well, they might actually if your cut is wider, but I always usually go for about 1 inch. I don't think it's going to work in this case because the boards are 8 feet long. We have 97 inches, so we only have 1/2 inch on each side to spare. So 7.5. And then you can space the components out a bit better. Say, using a 1/4 inch cutter, you only want to, I don't like to go less than a 1/2 inch of material left. So I will say we'll space those out 1 inch because 1/4 inch plus 1/4 inch plus 1/2 will be a 1 inch. Labels, I don't really want labels because they kind of just get in the way. And then I'm going to save those as my defaults today. You can also say you want to include bodies. If you want to make a sketch only and sketch output to a DXF file. So you could just have, if you weren't actually going to use these for cutting, you just wanted to have a file that you can reference and say, okay, this is about how I need to cut it out on the saw. Then you can just save it to a DXF file and print it out. But yeah, so you just click OK. It'll ask you where to put that CSV. I'm going to say on my desktop, and just go to session 1. And it does all the work for you. Well, like I said, 99%. Just give it a second, and it kind of lays it out, it adjusts your camera and everything. And then I hide the original components because it basically makes a copy of them and moves them into place.
So Jacob, two quick questions. One, so when you have this, what do you do with it? And secondly, this product that you use, that's an add-on, right?
Yeah. So
what would you do if you didn't have that add-on?
So I will right-click on this little feature in the bottom and click Suppress Features. That kind of hides the, the map boards side of things. I'm going to adjust the parameters again and say that we actually only want, it's made a bunch of parameters for us for the map thing. So I'm going to actually delete that feature and delete its contents as well. And I'm going to undo the thing here. This is just to make it a bit easier for us to lay them out manually. Delete the map and delete the map there. So for instance, if we have these three parts, we can actually just lay them out manually. They're not connected or anything. They look connected, but they're not. So we can actually just kind of drag them around, lay them out manually. Click revert at the top to get them back into place. You press M for move, and then you can select the component. And we're going to select this bracket. And you see it has all these little kind of dots and triangles around that you can lock your cursor to. So we're going to take advantage of that and just use the corner here, and then say we want to drag it and rotate it to be 90 degrees and approximately in line with the shelf here, and then get a better view of things. Then just kind of lay them out in an appropriate manner.
Oh.
So that's all the kind of software is doing, but as you can see already, this is
okay.
less than.
So you have to do your own layout.
Yeah. So important, if you're using components, they have an original position. So what you need to do is check capture position, and that creates a feature in the timeline. So we roll back behind that feature, it goes back into its place. If you go to where we're at after we've positioned it, it goes there. So you just need to do that kind of individually for each piece. It's just the same kind of thing.
And then this somehow gets fed into that computerized
Yeah.
thing.
So, I mean, if we're interested, I can briefly go over it, but it's not really in the scope of today. It's more kind of a design.
Are you going to do a future class on it?
Yeah, I can do. But basically, here in the top left, where it says design, you go down to manufacture. And the kind of screen will change up a little bit. You get some different options up at the top. You need to create a setup file, which is basically telling it what the size of your stock material is. In our case, it would be a stock material with a fixed size that is 3/4 of an inch thick. And we want to use, on this part here, the model, say we want these 3 parts in there. I know there's a 4th bracket, but for our purposes, we'll just kind of show this. Then you need to tell it where the origin of that is for the CNC. I use the center bottom for the CNC, because then I can do 2-sided if I need to, by flipping it about the center. The stock is going to be slightly bigger, say 97 by 49. That's fine, actually, you can cut it down to 400 and have it be that size. And we're going to say the model position is offset from the bottom by 0 inches. And hit OK. says the Z height is less than the models because we didn't align them perfectly vertically when I kind of manually did everything with rotations. So this is fine if you just have 2D profiles. In that case, then you could use one of the 2D operations, say 2D contour, which would be around the outsides. Select a tool. If you don't have any tools pre-made, they have sample tools in inches. I would just grab something like 3/4 inch size, 1/4 inch size. Sorry, I have one in my files here. If you want to make one, you can just make a new tool up in the top. I'm going to use one that's already made. And it kind of has all the feeds and speeds. You've got to set that up for the CNC. That's a whole other thing. And like Fusion, like many parts of Fusion, it's got many different tabs on this kind of thing. So the first one is kind of tool selection. The second one is what geometry you want to work